So recently there was news that the government is planning to decriminalize check bounce cases to facilitate ease of business in India. I've had frantic calls from multiple clients asking me whether that's true and what will happen to their 138 case once this decriminalization happens. I explained to them that they are not without remedy. They still have the remedy of filing a summary suit for recovery of money on the basis of those bounced checks. But of course, they had a very valid apprehension that the people with whom they got into this trouble in the first place are those kind of people who would love to have a civil suit dragged on for years and then they pay the amount along with a little bit of interest rather than shell out the money upfront without any inconvenience to the person who has forsaken that money. But the bigger point is, why do we need, or what else can we do to facilitate ease of business? The biggest problem I feel is the law of contract as well as the Specific Relief Act. The Contract Act in India and the Specific Relief Act are extremely, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, they lack enforcement mechanisms. They lack any sanctity that an agreement in perhaps the West or some other developed countries it would have. A prime example is the several nooks and crannies in the Contract Act which allow for a huge scope of interpretation and allow courts to keep interfering in the contract. The reasoning that courts and the parliament give for having these kind of terms and provisions in these statutes is because otherwise the people of this country will keep getting taken for a ride. But the solution is not so simple. It is because that you have so much of liberal space for interpretation of these provisions that people do end up in court for one reason or the other. If strict implementation of contracts was done within very, very soon, within maybe 5 years or so, every single citizen would be well aware of his rights and liabilities under the law of contracts when there is very, very strict enforcement, and everybody would insist on getting the contracts duly vetted, properly go through every single term to see whether they might have any objection to any of those provisions. Similarly, the Specific Relief Act was a nightmare. Even if you have a contract, even if you have an agreement, there are various situations where that contract cannot be enforced because the Specific Relief Act said so. There were some major improvements in the amendment of 2018 which was done in the Specific Relief Act, the effects of which are now being seen in a few judgments, but the true outcome will be seen at the conclusion of the entire trial, which will take, of course, several more months if not years for the results of the trials to come out. The actual trial in a civil suit for mandatory injunction or for any other sort of injunction where the amendments which have been brought on, one of the major amendments being that earlier it was said that if monetary compensation can be awarded in as an alternative to the contract being performed, then that contract shall not be specifically enforced. That amendment did away with this provision that you cannot enforce if there is monetary compensation possible. Steps like these are what's going to help the country in ease of business. The government not running after every single citizen for non-payment or maybe ambiguity in payment of income tax, GST, customs duty, and all these other archaic taxes, high taxes, and confusing taxes, and several other things. License Raj, if you think that we are over, there are small things that you keep seeing here and there everywhere, because of which it is so difficult to do business. Everyone lives in constant fear of what is going to happen when the government checks everything that you are doing and finds 100 faults, because there are 100 different laws which require you to act, perform in 100 different ways for that government. That is what needs to go. Decriminalization of 138 perhaps is not the right answer in a country where everybody knows that if you renege from your contractual obligations, the worst case scenario, what you will suffer is, after several years down the line, you will suffer maybe 6 to 10% per annum interest over and above what you had to pay to the person in the first place. Not the answer. We have to look elsewhere.